I once went to Tulsa, Oklahoma. Have you ever spent time there? It's an extraordinary city and very, very interesting for many, many reasons. And one of them is that it is a incredibly overbuilt city. What I mean is there is so much more roadway than that town actually needs. You drive around, this is a small town. There's a town, of less than 1 million people, and yet it has the roadways of a place that's clearly intended to be so much larger than that. And that's because once upon a time, they were intended to be so much larger than that. You had one of the greatest, explosions of wealth in the history, certainly of the United States, when oil was discovered right there. It was the place in the world. It was thought at the time, this is before the Middle East had been discovered, as an oil source. This was the place. This was the world's source of an incredible amount of oil. Well, then, of course, the Middle East comes along, other sources come online, and Tulsa never sees the tens of millions of people that were projected at one point to move into that city. And so today, this is a really pleasant but relatively sleepy town. I mean, no offense to anybody living in Tulsa listening to this. That has, like 8-lane roadways. It looks like a Soviet parade ground. I mean, it's just huge. And I'm thinking about this in the context of how AI companies are thinking about building capacity for the creation of AI, for both the training and what they call the inference, which is the fancy word for the work of, producing cat videos for you. And the pace at which companies are pouring money into this is just really, really out of control at this point. It is such an enormous pace. And it's based on the idea that, it has to be the future, right? It has to be what's coming next. And as a result, we need to pour money into it. You've got folks, talking openly about putting data centers into space. At one point, Sam Altman was asked about where he's going to be able to find enough space and enough energy, to build data centers around the world. And he said, well, maybe we should just put them into space. Jeff Bezos is talking about the benefits of lunar development and using the moon as a base for launching projects in space. And, you've got Musk openly talking about trying to do this. This is an absolutely normal kind of conversation. But there are places in the past where this has gone wrong, right? Tulsa is one of those examples, but another is that in the 1840s, Britain was absolutely pouring money into something that it considered to be the future of everything. And clearly there was going to be massive and endlessly required capacity for this new technology, and that was railway. Tens of thousands of miles of track were laid down. Britain absolutely shoveled money into railway companies, and as a result, they wound up also kind of duplicating a bunch of routes or connecting towns that really were barely even on the map. And in the end, the capital expenditure just far exceeded the actual demand, and companies failed, before completing a single line. Investors lost their fortunes. Again, everyone knew that railways must be the future. They just didn't know which railways or how many, and they didn't know, how to write off the depreciation, and they didn't know all of the things that were going to come from sinking all of this money into this. Now, I am not arguing here that data centers and AI are going to somehow, be the equivalent of that, because there is, from these companies, there is enormous demand, but that demand is from these companies for the most part at this point. It is the kind of demand that they have made possible and they have created through, pricing a thing that costs them enormous amounts of money to provide at a price that enables me to pay $20 a month and have access to something like ChatGPT. And the question is that demand in the sense that that's going to justify the enormous, each company is talking about more than $1 trillion in capital expenditures to make this stuff happen. And to my mind, it's not clear to me, is that really going to be justified in the end? And can we afford, let's say we even get the dream of putting data centers into space. And one of the things that the people talking about building them up there are excited about is the idea that you would have this constant stream of sun that hits solar panels there without any kind of interference and in a much more direct and energy-full way. There is, in theory, I mean, you can imagine an incredible, an alternative future in which, incredible amounts of energy are being beamed back to the Earth in that way. There's this thing called the Kardashev Scale, and this is one of my favorite stories from my time at Popular Science, because I got deep into this rabbit hole. But Kardashev was a physicist in Soviet Russia working at a Moscow research institute, and he spotted the cyclical signal from deep space that he took to be some sort of alien message. He just thought, he just thought, well, it's mechanical, it's repeating, and so it therefore has to be a communication from aliens. Now, in the end, what I believe he discovered were pulsars, which is basically a rotating thing in space that is, as a result, sending off a rhythmic burst of energy, which he mistook for some kind of manufactured thing. But even once he was convinced of, once he realized his mistake, he became fascinated, lifelong fascination with the notion of extraterrestrials and extraterrestrial life. And he came up with this idea that came to be known as the Kardashev Scale. And it was the scale where a civilization would be judged by how much energy it is able to harness. Can it harness the energy of a single planet, of a civilization's own planet? Can it harness the energy? That would be wind, that would be solar. That'd be wind, that'd be like wave power, right? That kind of thing. Not to mention fossil fuels and the rest of it. Then the next step up was, can you harness the power of your closest star? And that's right where we would want to be in theory. And then can you harness the power of the universe? And we're nowhere near that, right? We're somewhere, we're not even at the full power of our own planet fully. And that concept makes me excited about the notion of something as clean as, solar panels in space. But the thing that dirties that concept up, of course, is the notion that we're going to be putting them up there in order to make, pornographic cat videos possible, right? Or knock-knock jokes or wedding vows or anything else that we're going to be asking these LLMs and other models for. Not to mention, consider that launching things into space, that's not clean, right? When you send something into space, you are inevitably, blowing huge amounts of pollution out, not just from the launch at the beginning. Unfortunately, it also, all of that propellant is ejected also at very high altitudes. And that's a real problem. Those emissions are a huge issue. Now, we're just seeing huge growth in rocket launches, right? We've seen, it was something like 170 or so in 2022. Already in 2025, we've had more than 270 launches, right? The launches are coming fast and steady. And, I can imagine the math in which we would do that in order to create a clean source of energy out in space, in orbit, for us to harness, but not to harness it for this particular set of companies and what they specifically want to do with it. That just feels like a sullying of that. So that whole shift that we're talking about, where suddenly these companies are so rich that they are thinking about openly, rolling into space with their data centers, is I think a mark of how convinced these companies have become, in the same way that railway companies were, and the founders of Tulsa, Oklahoma were once upon a time, that the future had to go the way they imagined. And of course, as we know from so much of history, that is not how it works.
The Rip Current is produced and created by me, Jacob Ward. And if you liked this show and you want more content like this, go to theripcurrent.com, where I publish a weekly newsletter that covers these same sorts of stories of the big invisible forces that have us all in their grip. And if you want to really do me a favor, if you could go to where you have listened to this or watched it and like it, share it, or even better, review it. Holy cow, is that helpful? It's the best possible way for me to find a new audience. I really appreciate you being here. Thanks for listening.